Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Catherine Hecht, and I am the Executive Director of the Alexander Valley Film Society. Welcome to our Focus On series. We have been quiet for the last few months, but we're back tonight, and we're back with a personal friend of mine, one of my old college chums from Purchase College days, and a fantastic film that we're running for another week, Bill T. Jones' D-Man in the Waters, which you definitely need to check out. But before we get started, we're going to do a little housekeeping. And the first thing up for mention is our land acknowledgement. So the Alexander Valley Film Society recognizes that we are on unceded lands of the Coast Miwok, Pomo, and Wapo. We respectfully acknowledge the Indigenous people who have lived here for thousands of years and who continue to contribute in meaningful ways to their communities and our society as a whole. So next up is that we are coming to you live across Facebook and YouTube, and feel free to comment, ask questions in whatever chat feature you're on. And if we have time at the end of our conversation, we will bring them up. We can put them on the bottom of the screen. So let us know where you're dialing in from or streaming in from, and we'll get to your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our special guest tonight. Roz, hello.
Hello. It's so wonderful to be here with you, Catherine. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, this is really, really amazing. I can feel myself turning red. But Roz, can you say your last name for us?
Yes, LeBlanc.
LeBlanc.
Yes, it's French.
It is French. And Roz is one of the co-directors of the film that we're talking about, and also a main part of the film. So co-directing and in the film. And so that's where I kind of want to start. I just want to start with your journey into creating the film. Clearly the dance work, this particular piece, the pedagogy, this was all a part of your journey to begin with. How did this become a film?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So we'll start at the largest part of the story, which is also in a way the most special for me. So I'm producer, co-director, and I'm in it. And all of that evolved kind of organically as this project unfurled. I was a dancer with the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane company in the 90s. And D-Man in the Waters was absolutely kind of remains my favorite piece to perform. And when I left the company as a dancer, I wanted to continue my association with the company. And I guess in the early 2000s, they began to license out the first section of D-Man in the Waters. It's a 4-section dance to all 4 movements of Mendelssohn's octet in E-flat major. And so they would license out the first movement. And so I began to restage it in colleges around the country. The process of restaging it was one that I found unique because I would also restage other dances of Bill T. Jones's. And D-Man in the Waters was the one that was the most challenging to restage. And it was counterintuitive because the movement is running, sliding, jumping, leaping, catching, falling. It's all of this very gross motor function that, for the most part, in their development, college-age students can really latch onto. You know, I mean, it's fun, for lack of a better word, right? It's fun movement. But at the end of the day, it was the most elusive in terms of really feeling like it's reignited once it got to the stage. Mm-hmm. And the question as to why was the birth of the film. I didn't initially set out to make a film. I'm not a career filmmaker. I didn't know the first thing about making a film. And I started out wanting to write a book, actually. And so because I had been a member of the company, I had performed with a lot of the original cast members. I obviously had a relationship with Bill T. Jones. I reached out to all of them and said, okay, you were there for the making of D-Man in the Waters. I'm writing a book. I just started an email chain. can we start the conversation? Just send me stories of what you remember. And it was literally the floodgates had opened. The stories were pouring out. And I realized that this story had never been told. Like, these original members that were there in the room at this pivotal time in Bill T. Jones's life, just on the wake of losing Arnie Zane, no one probably had really ever asked them, what was that like? And it was actually one of the dancers, Greg Hubbard, who is in the film as well. He's the one who said, this really should be a movie, because all of these stories we're telling you, they're embedded in the choreography. So you kind of need to see both. Wow. You need a visual element. And I said, okay, I don't know the first thing about making a movie, but I can at least, get some seed money. That's seed money. And then get somebody to take it over. And 8 years went by, no one ever took it over. So I just kept raising more money, kept going through those steps of making this movie. It took 8 years, but that's a very condensed version of saying that's how that happened.
Oh, wow. I have so many questions about that. First of all, I want to go back to one of the things you first said. Why in this journey was it important for you to translate this and share it with college age dancers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one, I will say that throughout this process, I have asked myself and had to ask myself over and over again, because it really does answer the question, why am I making this movie? Why do I care so much? Is it just my obsession, or is there really something here? So it's a wonderful question. I think there are two things. At the time that you and I, because we were in undergrad together,
yep.
AIDS was something. We were in another epidemic, right? And because it was differently transmitted, it was not the same as COVID now. It did not have that kind of direct effect on our life and lifestyle and livelihood, but it was around us. I had teachers who would come back, 30 pounds lighter than they were before the summer, and going into New York City at that time, as you probably remember, you would see people, walking down the street wearing the kind of scarlet letter of AIDS, right? With Kaposi sarcoma and very thin, kind of hiding under baseball caps and huge clothing because of the stigma, So, and then not to mention the whole experience of being a young person coming of sexual maturity at that time and getting the basically fear of God beaten into you about the possibility of catching HIV. So all of those things made that time period incredibly heightened. For me, it just felt like I was in this kind of pressure cooker, and the experiences were incredibly memorable and very heightened for me. And then meeting the Bill T. Jones Company at that time, Bill T. Jones, it was not long after he had lost Arnie, not long after Damien had also passed, and they were also in it, and I remember being in the back of the room, and it's interesting, Bill doesn't remember this, but I remember being an apprentice in the back of the room. And when the company would go on break from working on this dance, D-Man in the Waters, he would come up to us and say, do you know what this gesture refers to? Do you know who D-Man was? Do you know? It was just like this quiz to make sure we understood the history of this dance. We understood where it was coming from. This wasn't just, what he was telling me was, this isn't just any old dance that you're doing, right? D-Man is a person. And he's dead, and he was only 32. So let's talk about this. Like, we're in this right now. So all of that made it incredibly. I was 19,
Yeah.
So I was just soaking it up, like, oh my God, you know?
Yeah.
And I kind of lost track of your original question. I hope I answered it.
You know, you kind of did. I mean, I was sitting here and feeling like a wave of privilege of having been at least in the universe with you in that moment that clearly broke something open precious enough to keep returning to that moment over and over again.
Yeah.
And you know, we were talking before we went live about how, first of all, you were a kid, you know, when you started this work. But the other thing I would add to that is I was really taken in the film by your articulation of that experience, because I don't recall having the same experience when I was 19 and 20. And I can't, you know, I definitely, where are you from originally?
Baltimore.
You're from Baltimore. Okay. Baltimore. Yeah, I came from very sheltered Texas, and suburban, you know, lifestyle, and really homogenized experience. And yet I remember seeing modern dance for the first time at Purchase and watching the gals. I mean, I don't want to misgender anyone now, but I remember watching like that crew of women and being so moved and blown away. And that was really, I mean, my artistic journey started there. So I too share this really profound moment of that period that, oddly enough, a lot of what I do is in education, and for a lot of those similar reasons. But so yes, you did answer that. And then I want to take that a step further too, because one of the things I thought was also really profound in the film, if you don't mind talking to this, a lot of the students you were working with were white. And this was the dance was co-created by a diverse group of individuals. It seems much more diverse than the group that you were teaching the dance to. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it speaks to part of the leap, the gap, in a way, that the dance then floods into in that moment. Yeah, and I would say not just white for the most part, but from a very, for the most part, privileged socioeconomic background as well.
Yeah.
And that is the demographic of the university. I mean, that, you know, that, so of course the dance department is representative of the university. So I think that it created, there's a certain particular type of tension in that. And the tension came from, I mean, in the film, Bill speaks so poignantly about the notion of survival and how the notion of survival transcended just 1989 AIDS epidemic. It was instilled in him as a young boy, listening to the oral history of his relatives and of his ancestors talking about slavery, surviving slavery, like literally staying alive. And so I think that right there, like kind of creates, there's a gap, because you know, just the idea, it's a privilege to know you don't have to survive life, you can live it. You know. And I think you know, Black people in this country, you know, don't necessarily, and especially of the socioeconomic background that he came from, don't have that privilege to say, you're here to live life. No, you're here to survive it, you know. And especially, I would say, Black men at this, you know, what we're extremely aware of right now of police brutality, and that being an extension of the slave system. So the lone Black voice in the cast, Brandon,
Mm-hmm.
is the one, and I kind of love this moment in the film for this, is the one person who, when they're talking about the stigmatization of AIDS versus the astigmatization of mass gun violence,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everybody's a victim in mass gun violence.
Yeah.
That one lone Black voice in the cast says, wait a second, as a Black man, you know, if I get gunned down, somehow it's my fault.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow I had counterfeit bills, or I was provoking the police, or, you know, so there is a stigma to gun violence. So I think that it created a lot of places of tension. And at the end of the film, when I get so frustrated, I think part of my frustration comes from the wanting them to be connected to the larger system that we're all operating in, as opposed to their own individual experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so how do you feel going back to that particular group of students? How did you feel at the completion of their performances? Did you feel like they had made the leap?
Well, yes. I mean, in terms of their performance, the performances were fantastic. They did a beautiful job, and I was very, very proud. Now, psychologically, emotionally, socially, I didn't necessarily see the leap then, but I see it now.
Yeah.
When I talk to them now.
I was going to ask.
Yeah. And that experience has had time to seep into their bones and their psyche, and the way they look at the world, and the choices they make, and the way they live their life, and the things that they say.
Mm-hmm.
Now I see it, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, it's just great.
And they so you had the premiere of the film. Was it at the Film Forum? That was the premiere?
Yes, the theatrical premiere, yes, at the Film Forum in New York City.
Wow. And some of the students joined you there.
There was one student there, Sam Blaze. Okay. She lives in New York City. And then the other students were in LA here at the Lemley.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the exercise that you take them through before that moment of frustration, where you can feel the disconnect between the movement and the inspiration and the passion and the desperation, mm-hmm. that gap, you have everyone hold hands and start, some fall and some don't. And you talk about being able to, when you're together in person, you have a more visceral sense of how people in your life, in your community, are actually doing. And I wanted to ask you if you thought that ever could translate in this realm, digitally, virtually, when we don't have the luxury of being in person. Like, I never would have thought to ask you this question until this year, mm-hmm. But what do you think now, having gone through COVID, have you been able to find that kind of connection?
I don't know. I mean, I have had moments of really, like, I feel like, and we probably all have had moments where I feel incredibly moved by the collective consciousness in a way that only could happen during COVID. Like, for instance, in New York City at the height of the crisis there, the banging on the pans at 7 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is only COVID created. But oh my gosh, I mean, it gives me goosebumps just to think about it now, and the fact that that's music. I mean, all we have in that moment to connect each other is music. So let's make the music, right?
Oh, I
And
really
then,
love that.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and that's how much art is critical, you know,
Yeah.
because sometimes it is really all we have.
Yeah.
And then also after George Floyd's murder, just what it meant to walk into the street and show up for the rally at a time when there was no greater threat to actually going outside and showing up with a group of people. Like we're actually saying like, okay, this is the worst possible time that you can gather in a huge group of people, but we need to do it because George Floyd was murdered.
Right.
And damn it, we are not sitting at home. Like that, those things really, they're incredibly moving. And I almost feel like COVID then creates such disconnection that the moments of reconnection become even more poignant in a way. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, I had a moment yesterday where I saw a woman who from my town. She has a clothing store and she's a lovely person, but I saw her behind a mask in a grocery store for the first time in 18 months, maybe. And she looked gorgeous to me,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I think that lack of connection or the absence of connection, yeah, it heightens it. So what is your work life like now? Are you teaching full time? Are you choreographing, directing? Tell me about that.
Well, the distribution for the film has been, you know, really kind of a wonderful thing to be consumed with this summer, which is great. Yeah. And I am chair of the dance department at Loyola Marymount University now. So that is full on, especially because we are planning as of now to be back in person in our studios at the end of this month. So that's incredibly consuming. Just to the whole notion of pedagogy has changed, you know, for good now. So that's very consuming. I do see myself returning to live theater. Making a film was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I gladly will allow this to be my, you know, kind of one-hit wonder. So I don't see a life in film for myself, but I love live theater. Love it. And so I look forward to getting back to that, choreographing, you know, performing. I'm performing in September, actually, in New York, which will be wonderful. So
what are you doing?
I'm doing a show called Light and Desire by Colleen Thomas, and a wonderful show about women and fascistic thinking. So very, very apropos, right?
How often are you going back and forth?
Not as often as it seems. I mean, you know, the show in New York in September, and then I was there in July for the premiere. But other than that, I really have relocated to Los Angeles, and so you know, like you, I was in New York for 20 years, and now, you know, I have kids and a life here in LA. So I really am located in LA. But, you know, for live theater, I think New York is still, you know, there's still the Mecca.
Yeah.
So it brings me back, you know, for those things.
Do you have time for me to ask you 2 more quick questions?
Yes. And I would love to, at some point, give a little shout out to my co-director, Tom Hurwitz, who
yes, excellent.
Couldn't be with us. But please go ahead.
Well, which, by the way, the cinematography in this film is what really tells the story or helps tell the story, you know? So, yes, I would agree with that. And I wanted to ask you about how this film ended up with such positive distribution.
You know, I think, well, Kino Lorber, our distributors, are fantastic. I mean, I just am really, and I have nothing to compare it to, but Tom does, and Duana Butler, who is the other producer, they do, and they are also just like so enthusiastic with Kino. They've been so fantastic. I think that really, and this is the thing with documentary film. I think it's one of the most wonderful things about documentary is that you make a film, and then the world around it shifts. and sometimes it shifts and it obliterates the film, and it's like, who cares about that, and sometimes it shifts and it brings the film into stark relief, and everybody's glomming onto it. And I think COVID happened, and so a film about art in a pandemic suddenly made sense.
And that was actually the last thing I wanted to ask you, and I can't remember the company member's name, but he used the term spiritual nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Sean Curran.
It was John?
Sean Curran.
Sean, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on that, and I certainly, I was pleasantly surprised to be fed more than I even anticipated, because I had a connection with you. But to watch the film, I felt my cup fill, my tank fill up, Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Oh, yeah. It's incredibly, incredibly wonderful to hear that, because I think that throughout this process, I think I even mentioned it at the beginning, that I was very rigorous with myself as to why I'm making this and what my goal was, and what I wanted out of it. And one of the things I wanted out of it was to give the audience the same feeling walking out of the film as the dance gives to the live audience walking out of the theater. Because that's the thing about D-Man in the Waters, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't show the whole dance in the movie, is because you have to see it live. And the other reason, and the other thing is that D-Man in the Waters is so special because when you see it live, your cup is full. You said it, like you walk out of the theater and your cup is full, and you may not even understand why. Yeah. So the fact that the film mimics that is just, I feel like that's all the success that I need,
That's awesome. Not bad for a one-hit wonder.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, this is where I will just piggyback into Tom for a second, because I could not have made this film without Tom Hurwitz. And there are many reasons why I say that, but one of them is because he coming on to the film, agreeing to do it, because I just reached out to him just saying, hey, Tom, what do you think of this project? It was a game changer for me. He brought his filmic expertise. I kind of brought in the knowledge of the dance and the dancers and the company and the story and all that stuff. He brought in the filmic expertise. But then also his ability to shoot dance, to understand dance, understand the energy, the momentum, the trajectory, all of that stuff meant that, once it evolved that I was in the film, no longer just producing, but in the film, I kind of said to him, you're on your own when I'm teaching, because I can't do both. So he's directing himself, and and that trust and that comfort that I had in him to just say, you take it. I know we're getting incredible dance footage, So it is, if it's a good one-hit wonder, it is, he is by my side in that, because I could never have done this without him.
Well, one of the things that I was going to ask him was about philosophy in his creative process, because I had a sense that might have been the case. But I also, to make that a little meta, I was thinking about watching you when we were kids, and I was thinking about how there's so much instinct when, we're 17 to 20 years old, And then the benefit and the luxury of making it to 40, 50 years old is that we get to develop a philosophy out of that instinct that then we get to pass on to other people, whether it's in creative works like this or teaching or directing or choreographing. And so it was just so fluid. It was as much a part of the dance as the dancers were. So you can please tell him I said that if you have.
I will absolutely tell him you said that. And he will take that to heart. And yeah, he's very proud of the work in this film that he did. And I am too. I mean, it's just stellar dance photography.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of bad dance photography out there. So,
well,
so he raised the bar for sure.
Is there, when you talk about the film, is there anything that I didn't ask that you always think, oh gosh, I really want to just mention this? Or?
Well, the only thing that I would say is that I think that one of the things, and having seen the students recently, I mean, they're adults, they're out, they're professionals now. They're not students anymore, but they're students in the film. And having seen them recently, one of the things that I think is that I always want to remind myself to say is that they allowed us to witness them in a moment in time in their development and a moment in time historically. We had come off of 8 years of Obama. Mm-hmm. We shot that in 2016. That last scene in the film was the Saturday before the election on Tuesday, the 2016 election on Tuesday. They were coming, their political world up until then had someone in the White House who had their best interest at heart. So, and they allowed us to see them at that place as who they are. They are very different people now.
Wow.
And I think they have moments where they're just like, what's that? Did I really say that? But I, over and over again, want to always commend them for their honesty, their bravery, their vulnerability, and their ability to stand up with the film now and say, yes, that was me. And I was learning. I was learning, and you are witnessing me learning. And that's all we can ask. I mean, they were just so vulnerable and brave and wonderful. And I always want to give them a shout out and a thank you.
I'll join you in that. And Roz, we're so lucky for you to hold that space with them.
Thank you.
Yeah, couldn't have been a better space holder.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh boy. Well, that kind of brings us to the end. We've been talking a good half hour. I could probably talk another 2 hours, but
I know. We'll have to go for lunch or something.
LA, San Francisco, they're so close. That's what everybody thinks, at least. But thank you so much for being here. And
my pleasure.
Good luck with reopening and getting back to campus and the show in New York, and just huge, big hugs and blessings and all my good thoughts and wishes for you. It's so lovely to connect. Yeah.
Thank you. And best of luck to Alexander Valley Film Society and your reopening and getting back and all of that. And I hope the crowds are just bursting at the door.
Eventually, yes, I hope so too. I'll give them a few minutes, but
right.
Thank you so much, Roz. And for the rest of you who joined us, thanks for being here. And hopefully we'll see you at the next talk back we have.
Yay!
Everybody. Thanks, Roz.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.